The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Bitter Creek, sending Hope Blackwood ducking behind a rain barrel, her heart pounding like a stampede of wild horses against her ribs. It wasn't meant for her, not this time, but in this godforsaken town, it served as yet another reminder that she needed to leave before her name joined the growing list of the dead or disappeared. Hope pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders and peered around the edge of the barrel. The Wyoming Territory in 1871 was no place for a woman alone, especially not in Bitter Creek, where Sheriff Donovan ruled with corruption flowing through his veins like whiskey. She'd arrived 6 months ago after her parents' passing, believing her uncle's promises of family and opportunity. Instead, she'd found only cruelty and unwanted advances from the most powerful men in town. "There you are," a gruff voice said from behind her. Hope whirled around to face her uncle, Vernon Blackwood, his face flushed with drink though it was barely past noon. "I was just heading back to the shop," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sheriff's been asking about you again," Vernon said, gripping her arm with fingers that would leave bruises. "Says you've been unfriendly to his offers of protection." "I don't need his kind of protection," Hope replied, pulling away. At 22, she'd learned enough about men like Sheriff Donovan to know what protection meant. Vernon's face darkened. "You ungrateful little," he hissed. "I took you in when nobody wanted you, and this is how you repay me? By turning down the most powerful man in town." "I never asked to be a bargaining chip in your gambling debts," Hope shot back. The slap came fast, stinging her cheek and bringing tears to her eyes. "You'll do as you're told," Vernon growled. "The sheriff's coming for dinner tomorrow night, and you'll be pleasant. You hear me? Pleasant." As Vernon stalked away, Hope touched her burning cheek, determination hardening in her chest like iron. She'd been saving every penny she earned at the general store, hiding them in a small pouch sewn into her petticoat. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. That night, Hope packed her meager possessions: 2 dresses, a photograph of her parents, her mother's silver hairbrush, and a small Bible. She slipped out before dawn, the April air still carrying winter's bite. The stagecoach wouldn't arrive until noon, but she couldn't risk waiting in town. Instead, she hiked to the crossroads 3 miles outside Bitter Creek, praying the stage would stop for a lone woman on the road. Hours later, Hope sat on her small trunk, watching the eastern horizon for dust that would signal the approaching stagecoach. Her stomach growled, she hadn't dared stop for breakfast, and her feet ached in boots that had never been properly broken in. The sound of hoofbeats made her stand quickly, heart racing again, but it wasn't the stagecoach. A single rider approached from the north, a tall figure silhouetted against the morning sky. Hope glanced around, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. There was nowhere to hide on the open road, and running would only make her look guilty of something. As the rider drew closer, she could make out more details. A broad-shouldered man on a chestnut gelding, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. A Winchester rifle was secured in a scabbard beside his saddle, and a star-shaped badge glinted on his vest. Hope's heart sank. Another lawman. She straightened her spine and raised her chin, determined not to show fear. The rider slowed his horse to a walk, then stopped a respectful distance away. "Morning, madam," he said, tipping his hat back to reveal a weathered face with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Everything all right out here?" "Yes, thank you," Hope replied stiffly. "I'm waiting for the stagecoach." The man nodded, his gaze taking in her trunk and the dark circles under her eyes. "Heading west or east?" "West," she answered after a moment's hesitation. "To Laramie." "Long journey to make alone," he observed. "I'm Deputy Marshal Lucas Hawkins. Most folks call me Luke." "Hope Blackwood," she said, then immediately regretted giving her real name. "Well, Miss Blackwood, stage is running about 2 hours late today. Bridge trouble down south." He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "If you don't mind my company, I'd be happy to wait with you. These crossroads can attract unsavory types. Hope studied him cautiously. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-browned skin and laugh lines around his eyes. Unlike Sheriff Donovan's predatory stare, the Marshal's gaze was steady and respectful. That's kind of you, Marshal, but unnecessary. I'm quite capable of looking after myself. Luke smiled slightly. I don't doubt that, Miss Blackwood, but I'd feel better knowing you were safe. Besides, he added, reaching into his saddlebag, I've got coffee and biscuits I'm willing to share. Her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl, and Hope felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. Luke pretended not to notice. He led his horse to a nearby patch of grass and set about building a small fire. Hope watched him warily, but couldn't deny the appeal of hot coffee and food. Leaving Bitter Creek behind? Luke asked conversationally as he set a small pot of water on the fire. Hope tensed. You know Bitter Creek? Unfortunately.
His tone was dry.
I've had dealings with Sheriff Donovan before. Then you understand why someone might want to leave, Hope said carefully. Luke met her eyes. I do. Donovan runs that town like his personal kingdom. I've been trying to build a case against him for 2 years, but witnesses have a way of disappearing. Hope's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the tin cup of coffee he offered. Is that why you're here? Looking for witnesses? Partly, Luke admitted. There's been talk of women going missing from Bitter Creek. Young women without family to ask questions. A chill ran through Hope despite the morning sun. I've heard the same, she said quietly. 3 in the past year. Luke's eyes sharpened. You know something? Hope hesitated, then said, only rumors. That they caught the sheriff's eye, then refused his advances. The marshal was silent for a moment, his jaw tight. Then he passed her a biscuit wrapped in a clean handkerchief. Eat something, Miss Blackwood. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. The biscuit was simple but delicious, studded with dried berries and honey. Hope ate slowly, savoring each bite. Thank you, she said when she'd finished. Where will you go in Laramie?
Luke asked.
Do you have family there? Hope looked away. Not exactly. I have enough saved for a few weeks' lodging while I look for work. And if Sheriff Donovan comes looking for you? Her eyes snapped back to his. Why would he? A beautiful young woman suddenly disappearing from his town? A woman he's shown interest in? Donovan's not the type to let go of what he considers his. Fear clutched at Hope's throat. She hadn't considered that Donovan might actually pursue her beyond Bitter Creek's borders. What would you suggest, Marshal? That I return and submit to a man who's likely responsible for 3 women's disappearances? Luke shook his head. No, madam. I'd never suggest that. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I have a homestead about 30 miles northwest of here. It's not much a cabin, some good grazing land, a small creek. I'm rarely there, given my duties. Hope stared at him, not understanding. What are you saying? I'm saying I have a proposition, Miss Blackwood. My homestead needs a caretaker. Someone to maintain the place while I'm away on martial business. It would be safe, private, and well beyond Donovan's reach. And what would you expect in return for this? Generosity, Hope asked, suspicion evident in her voice. Luke met her gaze directly. Honest work, nothing more. The cabin needs upkeep, and I've got some livestock that needs tending. I'd pay a fair wage, provide room and board, and you'd have my name as protection without. He cleared his throat, without any of the usual obligations that might come with such an arrangement. Hope studied him, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives. Why would you do this for a stranger? Luke was quiet for a moment, staring into the small fire. Because 5 years ago, my sister found herself in a situation not unlike yours. She fled a bad marriage to a powerful man. No one would help her because they feared her husband. His voice grew rough. I was deployed with the army then. By the time I returned, It was too late. Hope's suspicions softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Marshal." "Luke," he corrected gently. "If we're to be neighbors of sorts, you might as well use my given name." The distant rumble of wheels and the jingle of harnesses announced the approaching stagecoach. Hope stood, brushing dust from her skirt, her mind racing. The offer was tempting far more security than she could hope for in Laramie as a single woman with limited funds. But trusting a man she'd just met seemed equally dangerous. "I don't need to know your decision now," Luke said, standing and stamping out the small fire. "But if you're interested, don't get off in Laramie. Continue to Fort Laramie Station. I'll make arrangements with the station master to direct you to my property." The stagecoach appeared on the horizon, a cloud of dust rising behind it. "And if I choose Laramie?"
Hope asked.
Luke nodded respectfully. "Then I wish you the best of luck, Miss Blackwood. But I'd advise changing your name and being careful about who knows where you came from. Donovan has connections throughout the territory." The stagecoach slowed as it approached, the driver calling out a greeting to the marshal. Hope gathered her belongings, her mind still undecided. As the driver loaded her trunk, she turned back to Luke. "Thank you for the coffee and company, Marshal Hawkins." Luke tipped his hat. "Safe travels, Miss Blackwood. I hope our paths cross again under favorable circumstances." Hope boarded the stagecoach, finding herself squeezed between a portly businessman and an elderly woman with a caged canary. As the coach lurched forward, she looked back through the window. Luke remained at the crossroads, a solitary figure watching her departure, his offer hanging in the air between them. The journey westward was long and uncomfortable. Hope spent the hours replaying the marshal's proposition in her mind, weighing the risks against the benefits. By the time the stagecoach made its overnight stop at a way station, she'd made her decision. "I'd like to change my ticket," she told the station master. "Instead of Laramie, I'll be traveling to Fort Laramie Station." 2 days later, Hope stepped down from the stagecoach at Fort Laramie Station, her legs stiff and her back aching from the long journey. The settlement was smaller than she'd expected, a cluster of buildings surrounding the actual fort in the distance. "Miss Blackwood." A young man approached, hat in hand.
"I'm Teddy Wilson."
"Marshal Hawkins asked me to meet you and take you to his homestead." Hope regarded him cautiously. "How do I know the marshal sent you?" Teddy smiled and produced a folded note. "He said you might ask that." "Here." The note was brief, written in a bold, clear hand. "Miss Blackwood, Teddy Wilson is trustworthy. He'll see you safely to the homestead. I've arranged for supplies and will join you in 3 days."
Elkins.
"Very well," Hope said, tucking the note into her pocket. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson." Teddy loaded her trunk into a wagon already half filled with supplies. "Marshal said to get whatever you might need. There's food, some fabric for curtains and such, seeds for planting if you're so inclined." As they traveled, the landscape opened up before them, rolling hills giving way to vast prairies dotted with wildflowers. After nearly 2 hours, Teddy turned the wagon onto a less traveled trail that followed a meandering creek. "Almost there," he said cheerfully. "Just over that rise." When they crested the hill, Hope caught her breath. Below them, nestled in a small valley where the creek widened, stood a sturdy log cabin with a covered porch. A barn and corral stood nearby, and beyond them stretched acres of good grazing land. It wasn't grand by any means, but compared to her cramped room above her uncle's shop, it looked like paradise. Marshal built most of it himself, Teddy informed her as they approached. "Started 4 years ago when he got the land grant. Works on it whenever he's not chasing outlaws." The cabin was simple but solid, one main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom sectioned off at the back, and a root cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the floor. Everything was surprisingly clean, if somewhat sparse. "Marshal Hawkins came through yesterday to make sure everything was ready," Teddy explained as he carried in her trunk. "Got the place aired out, chopped wood for the fire. Said to tell you there's a shotgun in the corner there, loaded and ready if you need it. Hope nodded, oddly touched by the marshal's thoughtfulness. Please thank him for me when you see him. After Teddy left, promising to check on her the following day, Hope explored her new temporary home. The kitchen area was well equipped with cast iron cookware and basic provisions. The bedroom contained a rope bed with a fresh straw mattress covered in clean linens. A small table with a basin and pitcher stood beneath a window that looked out toward the creek. Hope unpacked her few belongings, then set about making the cabin more homelike. She swept the floors, arranged the new curtain fabric over the windows, and organized the supplies Teddy had brought. By evening, she had a stew simmering over the fire and fresh bread baking in the Dutch oven. As she sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Hope felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. Perhaps Marshal Hawkins's offer wasn't so strange after all. Perhaps it was simply one decent person helping another in a harsh and unforgiving land. The next morning, Hope woke to the sound of birds singing outside her window. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the quiet and the knowledge that Vernon wouldn't be pounding on her door, demanding breakfast. Then she remembered where she was and why, and her contentment dimmed slightly. This arrangement, however ideal it seemed, was temporary. Eventually, she would need to move on, find a more permanent situation. Still, as she dressed and began her day, Hope couldn't help appreciating the beauty of her surroundings. The cabin sat in a natural clearing, with the creek bubbling along one side and pine trees providing shade on the other. Wildflowers dotted the meadow beyond the corral, where 3 horses grazed peacefully. After breakfast, Hope decided to explore the property. She discovered a small vegetable garden, somewhat neglected but salvageable, and a chicken coop with a half-dozen hens clucking contentedly. Behind the barn, she found an orchard of young apple trees, their branches heavy with spring blossoms. The marshal has been busy, she murmured to herself, impressed by the amount of work one man had accomplished. It spoke of commitment and forward-thinking traits she hadn't often encountered in the men of Bitter Creek. Teddy arrived mid-morning with milk and eggs from his family's farm. "Ma sent these along," he said with a shy smile. "Said a woman setting up house needs proper provisions." "That's very kind," Hope replied, taking the basket. "Please thank your mother for me." "Will do. Marshal asked me to help with any heavy work you might need. Said I should mend that corral fence before his return." Hope watched as Teddy set about repairing the broken rails, his movements efficient despite his youth. "How long have you known Marshal Hawkins?" she asked, bringing him a cup of water. "Since I was knee-high to a grasshopper," Teddy replied. "He served with my pa during the war. When pa didn't come home, the marshal made sure we didn't lose our farm. Checks on ma regular like, brings us game when he's been hunting." He hammered another nail into place. "He's a good man, Miss Blackwood. One of the best." "So it would seem," Hope said thoughtfully. The next 2 days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Hope cleaned the cabin thoroughly, planted seeds in the garden, and collected eggs from the henhouse. Each task brought a sense of accomplishment, and by the time she retired each evening, she was tired in a way that felt honest and satisfying. On the morning of the 3rd day, Hope was kneading bread dough when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart quickened as she wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch. Luke Hawkins rode into the clearing, his horse moving at an easy trot. He looked much as he had at the crossroads, though perhaps more tired around the eyes. When he saw Hope on the porch, he smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Miss Blackwood," he called, dismounting. "I see you decided to accept my offer after all." "It seemed the most sensible option," Hope replied, surprised by how pleased she was to see him. "Thank you for the arrangements. Everything has been more than adequate." Luke removed his hat as he approached the porch. "I'm glad to hear it. I wasn't sure what a lady might require for comfort." This lady requires very little beyond safety and honest work, Hope assured him, both of which you've provided admirably. Luke's smile widened. Then we should get along just fine. He gestured to the cabin. May I? Hope stepped aside to let him enter, suddenly self-conscious about the changes she'd made. I hope you don't mind. I've rearranged some things. Luke looked around at the curtains framing the windows, the wildflowers arranged in a mason jar on the table, the gleaming pots hanging near the fireplace. Mind? Miss Blackwood, I've never seen this place look so welcoming. Hope felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. I'm making bread, she said, returning to the table where the dough waited. Are you hungry after your journey? Starving, Luke admitted. But I should see to my horse first. Of course. By the time you've finished, the bread will be ready. As Luke tended to his mount, Hope found herself watching him through the window. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, talking softly to the horse as he brushed it down. There was a gentleness in his interactions with the animal that spoke well of his character. Over a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken, Luke explained more about the arrangement he proposed. I'm often away for weeks at a time, he said. The nature of my work means I never know exactly when I'll return. What I need is someone to maintain the homestead in my absence, tend the garden, care for the livestock, keep the place from falling into disrepair. And in return?
Hope asked.
Room and board, of course. A monthly wage of $20. And my protection, should you need it. He met her eyes. I want to be clear, Miss Blackwood. This is a business arrangement. You'll have your privacy and my respect. The bedroom is yours. I'll use the loft when I'm here. Hope studied him, searching for any sign of deception or hidden intentions. Finding none, she nodded. I accept your terms, Marshal Hawkins. Luke, he reminded her, if we're to share this homestead, even intermittently, we should dispense with formalities. Luke, Hope repeated, the name feeling unfamiliar on her tongue. And you should call me Hope. They shook hands across the table, sealing their agreement. Luke's palm was warm and calloused against hers, his grip firm but not overwhelming. There's one more thing, Luke said, releasing her hand. I've been tracking Donovan's activities for some time. If you're willing, any information you have about his dealings in Bitter Creek could be valuable. Hope tensed. Are you asking me to testify against him? Not necessarily. But knowledge is power, Hope. The more I understand about Donovan's operations, the better chance I have of bringing him to justice. The thought of helping to stop Donovan sent a thrill of satisfaction through Hope, mingled with fear. If I help you and he discovers it, he won't, Luke assured her. Your safety is my priority. I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe I could protect you. Hope considered this, weighing the risks against the opportunity to strike back at the man who had terrorized her and countless others. Very well, she said finally. I'll tell you what I know. Over the next few hours, Hope shared everything she'd observed during her time in Bitter Creek, the bribes Donovan collected from businesses, the rigged card games at the saloon, the way certain freight wagons arrived at night and left before dawn. She told Luke about the missing women and how each had rejected Donovan's advances before disappearing. Luke listened intently, occasionally making notes in a small leather journal. When she finished, he looked grimmer than before. This confirms what I've suspected, he said. Donovan isn't just corrupt, he's running a criminal enterprise with tentacles throughout the territory. He reached across the table and briefly covered her hand with his. Thank you, Hope. This information may save lives. That night, Hope lay awake in the comfortable bed, listening to the occasional creak of floorboards as Luke moved about in the loft above. It was strange having a man in the house again, yet she didn't feel the fear or wariness she'd expected. Instead, there was an odd sense of security in knowing Luke was nearby. As promised, Luke was a respectful housemaid. Over the next few days, he worked from dawn until dusk, repairing the barn roof, reinforcing the chicken coop and clearing a fallen tree from the creek. He took his meals with Hope but spent evenings on the porch, giving her privacy inside the cabin. On the fourth night, Hope joined him outside, bringing 2 cups of coffee. The spring air was cool but not uncomfortable, and the sky above was a canvas of brilliant stars. "I've never seen so many stars," Hope said, settling into the second rocking chair. In Bitter Creek, the saloon lights drowned them out. Luke accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "That's one of the reasons I chose this land. The night sky reminds me how small our troubles are in the grand scheme of things." A philosophical lawman, Hope observed with a small smile. "You're full of surprises, Luke Hawkins." He chuckled, the sound warm in the darkness. "Most folks expect marshals to be all brawn and no brain. Makes it easier to do my job when they underestimate me." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, rocking gently and sipping their coffee. The creek provided a soothing background melody, while nightbirds called occasionally from the trees. "May I ask you something personal?" Hope ventured finally. "You may ask. I might not answer." "Why haven't you married? A man with land, a respectable profession. Surely there have been opportunities." Luke was quiet for so long that Hope thought he'd chosen not to answer. Then he said softly, "There was someone once. Rebecca was her name. We were to be married after I returned from the war." "What happened?" Hope asked, though she suspected the answer. "Influenza took her the winter before I came home. Her and half her family." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Hope could hear the old pain beneath it. "After that, I threw myself into building this place and my work as a marshal. Never seemed to be time for courting." "I'm sorry," Hope said simply. Luke nodded, acknowledging her sympathy without dwelling on it.
"And you?"
"No sweetheart left behind in Bitter Creek." Hope gave a short, humorless laugh. "Hardly. The men in Bitter Creek were like my uncle, interested only in what I could do for them. The decent ones steered clear, knowing Donovan had his eye on me." "Their loss," Luke said quietly. The simple statement, delivered without flattery or expectation, warmed Hope more than the coffee. For the first time, she allowed herself to really look at Luke Hawkins, the strong profile illuminated by moonlight, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the capable hands that held his coffee cup. He was handsome in a rugged way, she realized, though his appeal lay more in his quiet strength and integrity than in his physical appearance. "I should turn in," Hope said, rising before her thoughts could wander further. "Dawn comes early." "That it does," Luke agreed, standing as well. "Good night, Hope." "Good night, Luke." The next morning, Hope woke to find Luke already gone, a note on the table explaining that he'd received word of a stagecoach robbery near Cheyenne and would be away for at least a week. He'd left money for supplies and instructions for Teddy to check on her every few days. Hope was surprised by the disappointment she felt. In less than a week, she'd grown accustomed to Luke's presence, the sound of his boots on the porch, his deep voice thanking her for meals, the sense of security he provided simply by being there. "Don't be foolish," she chided herself as she collected eggs from the henhouse. "This is exactly the arrangement you agreed to. His coming and going is part of the bargain." Still, the cabin felt emptier without him, the days longer and the nights too quiet. Hope threw herself into work scrubbing floors, mending clothes, weeding the garden. She baked more bread than she could possibly eat and gave the excess to Teddy for his family. She explored further afield, discovering a small pond beyond the orchard where wild berries grew in abundance. One afternoon, 10 days after Luke's departure, Hope was hanging laundry on the line when she heard approaching riders. Expecting Teddy, she continued her task until she realized there were multiple horses. Alarm shot through her as she dropped the wet sheet back into the basket and hurried toward the cabin. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, and Hope's blood turned to ice as she recognized the man in the lead, Sheriff Donovan, his distinctive red beard visible even at a distance. Flanking him were two of his deputies, men known for their brutality. Hope dashed into the cabin, slamming the door behind her. Luke's shotgun stood in the corner as promised. She grabbed it with trembling hands, checking that it was loaded before moving to the window beside the door. "Miss Blackwood," Donovan called, his voice falsely jovial. "No need to hide. Your uncle's been worried sick about you, running off like that." Hope remained silent, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they could hear it outside. "Now I know you're in there," Donovan continued, his tone hardening. "We tracked you all the way from Fort Laramie. Be reasonable and come out. We've got a long ride back to Bitter Creek." "I'm not going anywhere with you, Sheriff," Hope called, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is Marshal Hawkins's property, and I'm here with his knowledge and permission." A bark of laughter. "Hawkins? That interfering bastard? He's chasing his tail down near Cheyenne. Won't be back for days, from what I hear." Hope's stomach clenched. Somehow, Donovan had learned of Luke's whereabouts. The realization that this confrontation had been deliberately timed sent fresh fear through her. "I don't want to hurt you, Miss Blackwood," Donovan called. "But I will if you force my hand. Your uncle signed papers declaring you mentally unfit. I'm here to escort you home for your own safety." "That's a lie," Hope shouted back. "My uncle has no authority over me. I'm a grown woman of sound mind. Not according to the judge." There was a smugness in Donovan's voice that told Hope he'd planned this carefully. "Now, we can do this easy or hard. Your choice." Hope watched as the three men dismounted and spread out, clearly intending to surround the cabin. She had to act quickly. The shotgun was powerful but limited 2 shots before reloading. She knew there was a pistol somewhere, but she'd never found it during her cleaning. Making a swift decision, Hope threw open the door and fired a warning shot into the air. "The next one won't miss," she called. "I suggest you leave, Sheriff." Donovan ducked behind his horse, while his deputies drew their weapons. "That was a mistake, girl," he growled. "Now we do this the hard way." One of the deputies began moving toward the back of the cabin, while the other edged toward the side window. Hope retreated inside, trying to keep track of all 3 men at once. She knew she couldn't hold them off for long. The sound of breaking glass from the bedroom told her one of the deputies had smashed a window. Moments later, gunfire erupted from the front as Donovan provided covering fire for his men to enter. Hope ducked behind the heavy oak table, which Luke had overturned before leaving, as if he'd anticipated trouble might find her. The precaution saved her life as bullets splintered the wood where she'd been standing seconds before. "Give it up, girl," Donovan shouted. "You can't win this." Hope's fingers found a loose floorboard near the table, one she'd noticed days ago, but hadn't investigated. Prying it up, she discovered a hidden compartment containing exactly what she needed: Luke's pistol and a box of ammunition. The deputy who'd broken the bedroom window was now inside, his boots heavy on the floor. Hope took a deep breath, checked that the pistol was loaded, and prepared to defend herself. What happened next occurred so quickly that Hope would later struggle to recall the sequence of events. The deputy rounded the corner into the main room, his gun aimed at where she crouched. Hope fired Luke's pistol, the recoil stronger than she'd expected. The deputy fell back, clutching his shoulder. Simultaneously, the sound of galloping hooves and shouts from outside drew Donovan's attention away from the cabin. Hope heard his curse, followed by more gunfire, but this time, it wasn't directed at her. "Hope," a familiar voice called. "Are you all right?" "Luke." Hope could hardly believe her ears. "Stay down," he shouted. "It's not over yet." The wounded deputy was struggling to his feet, his gun still in his good hand. Hope kept him covered with the pistol. "Don't," she warned, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Hope heard the sound of bodies hitting the ground, followed by Luke's voice issuing commands. Moments later, the cabin door burst open, and Luke stood there, his expression a mixture of fury and relief, when he saw Hope alive. "Thank God," he breathed, crossing the room in 3 strides and kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" Hope shook her head, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Luke gently took the pistol from her trembling hands and helped her to her feet. "Donovan?" she managed to ask. "Wounded, not dead," Luke replied grimly. "Both he and his remaining deputy are secured. This one needs medical attention," he added, nodding toward the man Hope had shot. Within the hour, Luke had bandaged the wounded deputy and secured all 3 men to their horses. "I'll take them to Fort Laramie," he told Hope. "The commander there is a friend. He'll hold them until a circuit judge arrives." "What about the charges against me?"
Hope asked.
"Donovan said my uncle declared me mentally unfit." Luke's expression hardened. "Pure fabrication." "But even if there were such papers, they'd be meaningless once Donovan's corruption is exposed." He took her hands in his. "I'm sorry I wasn't here when they arrived. I received word in Cheyenne that Donovan was asking questions about you. I rode back as fast as I could." Hope squeezed his hands. "You came back in time. That's what matters." Luke searched her face, his concern evident. "Will you be all right alone tonight? I need to get these men locked up before they can cause more trouble." "I'll be fine," Hope assured him, with more confidence than she felt. "I've handled worse than a broken window and some bullet holes." Luke smiled slightly. "I don't doubt it. You're one of the bravest women I've ever met, Hope Blackwood." After Luke departed with his prisoners, Hope set about restoring order to the cabin. She swept up broken glass, patched the bullet holes as best she could, and scrubbed away bloodstains from the floor. The work was grim but necessary, helping to settle her jangled nerves. That night, alone in the cabin, Hope struggled to sleep. Every sound startled her, and the events of the day played on repeat in her mind. She'd shot a man. The fact that he'd meant her harm didn't entirely ease the weight of that action. Dawn was breaking when Hope finally drifted into an exhausted slumber. She woke hours later to the sound of a horse approaching. Grabbing Luke's pistol, which she'd kept beside her bed, she moved cautiously to the window. Relief flooded her as she recognized Luke returning, his posture weary but his back straight. Hope set the pistol aside and hurried outside to meet him. "You're back sooner than I expected," she said as he dismounted. "Rode through the night," Luke replied, his voice rough with fatigue. "Didn't want to leave you alone any longer than necessary." Hope felt a warmth bloom in her chest at his words. "Come inside. You need food and rest."
Luke didn't argue.
He followed her into the cabin, removing his hat and gun belt at the door. Hope noted the dark circles under his eyes and the slump of his shoulders as he sank into a chair at the table. "The commander at Fort Laramie was furious when I told him what Donovan had done," Luke said as Hope placed a plate of food before him. "Apparently, he's been suspicious of Bitter Creek's sheriff for some time. This gives him the leverage he needs to launch a full investigation." "Will they believe me over Donovan?" Hope asked, joining him at the table. Luke nodded. "Your testimony, combined with the evidence I've gathered and Donovan's actions today, is damning. Plus, one of his deputies is already talking, hoping for leniency." Hope felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "So it's over? I don't have to fear him anymore?" "It's over," Luke confirmed. "Donovan will face a military tribunal first, then civilian charges. He won't see freedom for many years, if ever." After eating, Luke insisted on repairing the broken window despite his exhaustion. Hope watched him work, struck by the care he took with each task and his determination to restore her sense of security. "You should rest," she told him when he finished. "You've been awake for more than a day." Luke ran a hand through his hair, leaving it appealingly disheveled. "I should check the property first, make sure there are no other unwelcome visitors lurking about." "The property can wait," Hope said firmly. "Sleep cannot." "I'll keep watch if it makes you feel better." A tired smile crossed Luke's face. Always looking after others, aren't you? Even the marshal's sent to protect you. We look after each other, Hope corrected. That's the arrangement, isn't it? Something shifted in Luke's expression, a softening around the eyes, a thoughtfulness that made Hope's pulse quicken. Yes, he said quietly. That's the arrangement. Luke slept through the afternoon and evening, not stirring even when Hope accidentally dropped a pan while preparing dinner. She let him rest, knowing he needed it after his hard ride and the confrontation with Donovan. When he finally emerged from the loft the following morning, he looked more like himself, his eyes clear and alert, his movements purposeful. I apologize for my poor company, he said as Hope handed him a cup of coffee. There's nothing to apologize for, she replied. You needed rest after what you did for me. Luke shook his head. I did what any decent man would do. No, Hope said firmly. Most men would have looked the other way. Or worse, handed me over to Donovan to avoid trouble. What you did was extraordinary, Luke. Don't diminish it. A flush crept up Luke's neck at her praise. Well, thank you for saying so. Over the next few weeks, life at the homestead settled into a new rhythm. Luke remained on the property rather than returning to his martial duties, explaining that he'd requested leave to testify against Donovan and ensure Hope's continued safety. They worked side by side, repairing damage from the attack, tending the garden, and caring for the animals. Luke taught Hope to shoot more accurately, praising her natural steadiness and focus. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, the books they'd read, the places they'd seen. Hope found herself looking forward to these conversations more than anything else. Luke was thoughtful and articulate, with a dry humor that often caught her by surprise. He listened to her ideas with genuine interest, never dismissing her opinions as her uncle and the men of Bitter Creek had done. As May turned to June, Hope realized with a start that she'd been at the homestead for nearly 2 months. What had begun as a temporary refuge now felt increasingly like home. The garden was flourishing under her care, the chicken flock had increased by 6 new chicks, and she'd added her own touches to the cabin, a quilt she'd pieced together from fabric scraps, wildflower arrangements that changed with the blooming seasons, curtains that billowed in the summer breeze. More surprising was her growing attachment to Luke himself. She found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way sunlight caught in his hair, the gentle way he handled newborn animals, the strength in his hands as he worked. At night, she sometimes lay awake, wondering what it would be like if their arrangement were different, if the respect and friendship between them might evolve into something more. But Luke maintained a careful distance, never overstepping the boundaries he'd established at the beginning. He was unfailingly kind and considerate, but his behavior remained that of a friend and employer, nothing more. Until the day everything changed. They were returning from town, where Hope had sold her first batch of preserves to the general store. The summer day was perfect, clear blue sky, gentle breeze, wildflowers painting the prairie in a riot of colors. Luke drove the wagon while Hope sat beside him, enjoying the scenery and the pleasant weight of coins in her pocket from her sales. The storekeeper asked if you'd bring more preserves next week, Hope said. He says his customers haven't tasted better. Luke smiled, glancing at her. I'm not surprised. You have a talent for making ordinary things exceptional. The compliment brought warmth to Hope's cheeks. It's just berries and sugar. It's more than that, Luke insisted. It's care and attention to detail, like everything you do. Hope looked away, flustered by the intensity in his gaze. The garden is doing well, she said, changing the subject. We should have corn ready for harvesting soon. Luke nodded, letting the conversation shift to safer topics. They were nearly home when the wagon hit a deep rut, jolting violently. Hope was thrown sideways, directly into Luke's solid chest. His arm came around her automatically, steadying her. Are you all right? He asked, his voice low near her ear. Hope meant to pull away immediately, to thank him and restore the proper distance between them. Instead, She found herself lingering, acutely aware of his warmth, the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, the clean scent of soap and pine that always surrounded him. Hope. Luke's voice had roughened, and when she looked up, his eyes were darker than usual, fixed on her face with an expression she'd never seen before. "I'm fine," she whispered, but made no move to pull away. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Luke's hand came up to touch her cheek, so gently it might have been a dream. "Hope," he said again, her name a question and a promise all at once. The wagon chose that moment to hit another rut, breaking the spell between them. Luke cleared his throat and returned both hands to the reins, while Hope straightened her skirts and stared fixedly at the approaching homestead. That evening, an awkward tension hung in the air as they moved around each other in the cabin, preparing and eating dinner with minimal conversation. Hope tried to recapture their easy camaraderie, but something fundamental had shifted between them. After dinner, Luke announced he was going to check on a mare that was close to foaling. "Don't wait up," he said, not quite meeting Hope's eyes. "It might be a long night." Hope nodded, disappointment mingling with relief at the prospect of some time alone to gather her thoughts. She cleared the dinner dishes and prepared for bed, trying not to think about the moment in the wagon or the look in Luke's eyes. She was nearly asleep when a commotion outside jerked her awake, Luke's voice calling urgently for her, followed by the sound of the door bursting open.
"Hope.
"Need your help," Luke shouted. She rushed from the bedroom to find Luke in the main room, his arms full of blood-smeared blankets. "The mare?" Hope asked, lighting the lamp. She had twins, Luke explained, his earlier awkwardness forgotten in the excitement of the moment. "First one came easy, but the second was backward. Got it turned around, but now the mother's rejecting it. Need to keep it warm and fed." Hope peered into the bundle and found herself looking at a tiny, spindly-legged foal with a white blaze on its forehead. "Oh," she breathed. "It's beautiful." Luke corrected. "It's a filly. Her brother's doing fine with their mama, but this little one needs extra care." For the next several hours, Hope and Luke worked together to keep the foal alive. Hope warmed milk, while Luke fashioned a feeding device from a cloth and a bottle. They took turns holding the trembling foal, rubbing her down with straw to stimulate circulation, and coaxing her to accept the bottle. Dawn was breaking when the filly finally took a full feeding and then struggled to her feet, wobbling but determined. Hope and Luke sat side by side on the floor, watching her with exhausted satisfaction. "She's a fighter," Luke said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Reminds me of someone else I know." Hope smiled, leaning against his shoulder without thinking. "What will you name her?" Luke was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "How about Hope? Seems fitting for a survivor who refuses to give up." The simple statement, delivered without flourish, moved Hope more deeply than any grand declaration could have. She turned to look at Luke and found him already watching her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "Luke," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, but knowing something important hung in the balance. "I care for you," he said abruptly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as her. "More than I should, given our arrangement. More than I've cared for anyone since Rebecca." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Hope had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I've tried to keep my feelings to myself, to honor our agreement, but after today, after what happened in the wagon." Hope's heart raced as Luke struggled for words. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. Luke met her eyes directly. "I'm saying that my feelings for you have grown beyond friendship or professional respect. I'm saying that I find myself thinking about you constantly, even when I should be focused on other things. I'm saying that watching you make this place into a home has made me want things I thought I'd never want again." Hope's breath caught in her throat. "What things?" "A partner," Luke said simply. "A family. A future shared with someone who understands me." He took her hand carefully, as if she might pull away. "I don't expect you to feel the same. You came here seeking safety, not this. If you want to maintain our original arrangement, I'll respect that completely. Nothing needs to change." Hope looked down at their joined hands, then back at Luke's face, earnest, anxious, hopeful. In that moment, all her careful defenses crumbled. "But what if I want things to change?" she whispered. Luke went very still. "What are you saying, Hope?" Instead of answering with words, Hope leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. Luke remained frozen for a heartbeat, then responded with such tender reverence that tears sprang to Hope's eyes. When they finally broke apart, Luke rested his forehead against hers, his breath coming quick and uneven. "I've wanted to do that since I found you waiting at that crossroads," he admitted. Hope smiled, feeling as though her heart might burst with happiness. "I think I've wanted you to since you offered me coffee and biscuits." Luke laughed, the sound joyful and unreserved. He pulled back slightly to look at her face. "So, where do we go from here?" "Forward," Hope said simply. "Together." The little foal chose that moment to bump against them, demanding attention. Luke and Hope laughed, the tension between them transforming into something warm and comfortable. "She approves," Luke said, stroking the foal's velvety nose. "She's wise beyond her hours," Hope replied, leaning against Luke's shoulder once more. The following weeks brought changes to the homestead and to Hope and Luke's relationship. Their working partnership remained, but now it was enriched by stolen kisses while gathering eggs, hands touching longer than necessary when passing tools, and evenings spent talking about their future together. Luke officially resigned his position as a deputy marshal, choosing instead to focus on building their homestead and establishing a horse breeding operation with the twin foals as his foundation stock. "Are you sure?" Hope asked when he told her of his decision. "Being a marshal has been your life for so long." Luke nodded, his expression serene. "It was something I needed to do after the war and after losing Rebecca. A way to impose order on a chaotic world. But now—" He took her hands in his. "Now I have something to build, not just wrongs to right." In late July, with wildflowers blooming across the meadow and the garden yielding its first harvest, Luke asked Hope to marry him. They were sitting by the creek, their feet dangling in the cool water after a long day of work. "It wouldn't change much practically," he said, uncharacteristically nervous. "We already share the homestead and the work. But I want to give you my name officially, to stand before God and our neighbors and promise to love and protect you for the rest of my days." Hope's answer was immediate and heartfelt. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." They were married in August beneath the apple trees, which were heavy with ripening fruit. Teddy and his mother attended, along with a handful of neighbors and the circuit preacher. Hope wore a new dress of sky blue cotton, with wildflowers in her hair. Luke could scarcely take his eyes off her throughout the simple ceremony. "I never thought I'd find happiness again," he told her that night as they lay together in what was now truly their bed. "After everything, the war, losing Rebecca, the years of chasing outlaws, and seeing the worst of humanity, I'd resigned myself to a solitary life." Hope traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "And I never thought I'd find a place where I truly belonged, or a man I could trust with my heart." "We saved each other," Luke murmured, drawing her closer. As summer turned to fall, and fall to winter, the homestead flourished under their combined care. The little filly, Hope, grew strong and spirited, while her brother, now named Courage, showed promise as a future stallion. The chicken flock doubled, the garden produced enough to see them through the winter with preserves to spare, and Luke added 2 rooms to the cabin in anticipation of a growing family. Word reached them in October that Sheriff Donovan had been sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison for corruption, kidnapping, and the murders of 2 of the missing women from Bitter Creek. The third woman was never found, But Donovan's deputy had testified that the sheriff had killed her and hidden her body in an abandoned mine shaft. "It won't bring them back," Hope said when Luke told her the news. "But at least there's some justice for them now." The first snow of winter found Hope and Luke sitting before the fire, planning for the spring planting and the addition of cattle to their growing operation. Hope had been unusually tired lately, and now she rested her head on Luke's shoulder, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the security of his embrace. "I was thinking," she said after a comfortable silence, "that we might need to add another room to the cabin sooner than we planned." Luke looked down at her, puzzled. "The 2 new rooms are barely finished." "Why would we need another so soon?" Hope took his hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "Because by summer, there will be 3 of us living here." Luke's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "You're certain?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Hope nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears. "The doctor in town confirmed it yesterday. We're having a baby, Luke." Luke gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A family," he whispered against her hair. "Our family." Hope thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear and desperation that had driven her from Bitter Creek, the chance meeting with a kind marshal at a dusty crossroads, the leap of faith she'd taken in accepting his offer. What had begun as a temporary refuge had become a true home, and the man who had offered her land and safety had given her his heart as well. "I love you, Luke Hawkins," she said, lifting her face to his. Luke's smile was as bright as the day they'd married. "And I love you, Hope Hawkins. More than I have words to say." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their homestead in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting golden light over the cabin that had become a sanctuary for 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed: not just land and safety, but love, understanding, and the promise of a future brighter than either had dared to imagine. When spring returned to the Wyoming Territory, it brought with it new life and fresh beginnings. The apple trees bloomed again, their delicate white flowers a canopy above the spot where Hope and Luke had exchanged their vows. The garden, expanded now to feed a growing family, sprouted green shoots that reached toward the sun. In the pasture, the yearling horses raced each other with boundless energy, while new foals wobbled alongside their mothers on spindly legs. And in the cabin, with sunlight streaming through curtains that danced in the breeze, Hope gave birth to a daughter they named Lily Rebecca Hawkins, Lily for the wildflowers that had been blooming when Hope first arrived at the homestead, and Rebecca to honor the woman whose memory had shaped Luke into the man he had become. "She's perfect," Luke whispered, cradling his newborn daughter with hands that trembled slightly. "Just like her mother." Hope watched them from the bed, exhausted but radiant with happiness. "She has your eyes," she observed. "And I think she'll have your determined spirit as well." As Lily grew from infant to toddler, the homestead prospered. Luke's careful breeding program produced horses known throughout the territory for their strength and intelligence. Hope's preserves and baked goods became a staple at the general store in town, providing a steady income to supplement what the homestead produced. Word of Sheriff Donovan's conviction spread, bringing other women forward with stories of mistreatment in Bitter Creek. Under new leadership, the town slowly began to change, though Hope never felt any desire to return. Her life was here now, on this land that had once been a stranger's offer of sanctuary and was now the foundation of her family's future. 2 years after Lily's birth, Hope and Luke welcomed a son they named Samuel James Hawkins. Where Lily was thoughtful and observant, Sam was adventurous and fearless from the moment he could crawl. "He's going to keep us on our toes," Luke laughed as he rescued 10-month-old Sam from his 3rd attempt to climb into the chicken coop. "Like father, like son," Hope replied with a smile, remembering the stories Luke had told her of his own mischievous childhood. As the children grew, so did the homestead. Luke added more land to their holdings, built a larger barn, and constructed a schoolhouse that served their children and those of nearby homesteaders. Hope planted an herb garden, started a small dairy operation, and taught both children to read by the firelight each evening. The filly named Hope grew into a magnificent mare, producing foals that carried her spirit and strength. She remained Luke's favorite mount, responding to his commands with an intelligence that sometimes seemed almost human. "She knows when a storm is coming before I do," Luke told a potential buyer who offered a small fortune for the mare. "And she's brought me home through blizzards when I couldn't see 2 feet ahead. She's not for sale at any price." On the 5th anniversary of their marriage, Luke surprised Hope with a journey to Denver, their first trip away from the homestead together. They left the children in the capable care of Teddy's mother and traveled by train, marveling at the changing landscape and the luxury of the Pullman car. Denver was a revelation to Hope, who had never seen a city of its size. They attended the theater, dined in elegant restaurants, and strolled through shops filled with goods from the East Coast and Europe. Yet after a week, both were eager to return to their land and their children. "It was wonderful," Hope told Luke as their train carried them homeward. "But I miss the smell of pine trees and the sound of the creek." Luke squeezed her hand. "City life has its appeal, but it can't compare to what we've built together." When they crested the final hill and the homestead came into view, the sturdy cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, the barn and corrals, the fields green with summer crops, Hope felt a surge of emotion so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Luke asked, concerned by her silence. "I was just thinking about that day at the crossroads," Hope said softly. "How afraid I was, how little I had, how desperate my situation seemed. If you hadn't stopped." "But I did stop," Luke reminded her. "And you were brave enough to take a chance on a stranger's offer." "The best decision I ever made," Hope said, leaning against his shoulder as the wagon carried them home. Lily and Sam ran to meet them, their faces alight with joy, their arms outstretched for hugs and the presents they knew awaited them. Behind them stood the cabin that had evolved from a simple shelter to a true home, filled with laughter and love and the countless small treasures of a life well lived. That night, with the children asleep and the homestead quiet under a canopy of stars, Hope and Luke sat on the porch where they had spent so many evenings during their courtship. The years had added a few lines to their faces and a touch of silver to Luke's temples, but the love between them had only deepened with time and shared experiences. "Do you ever regret it?" Luke asked suddenly. "Leaving everything behind to come here with a man you barely knew?" Hope turned to him, surprised by the question. "Regret? How could I regret the greatest blessing of my life?" Luke smiled, the expression as warm and genuine as it had been the first time she saw it. "Even with all the hardships? The blizzard that nearly took the livestock that first winter? The drought 2 years ago? Sam's fever that had us so worried. Especially with those things," Hope said firmly, "because we faced them together." She took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his in a gesture as familiar as breathing. "You offered me land when I had nowhere to go, safety when I was in danger, and your heart when I thought mine was too damaged to love again. There's nothing in this world I could regret about that." Luke brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I look at our children, at this land, at everything we've built, and I still can't believe my good fortune." "Not fortune," Hope corrected gently.
Faith.
"In each other, in the future, in the promise that love can heal even the deepest wounds." Above them, a shooting star streaked across the night sky, a fleeting reminder of the vastness beyond their homestead. But neither Luke nor Hope saw it. They were looking at each other, seeing in the other's eyes the reflection of a journey that had begun in fear and desperation, but had led to a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined. "I love you, Hope Hawkins," Luke said, the words a renewal of a vow made long ago beneath blooming apple trees. "And I love you, Luke Hawkins," Hope replied. today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the valley that had become their kingdom. Inside the cabin, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were cherished. And on the porch, a man and woman who had found in each other the courage to begin again held fast to one another, their shared future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky.